Hey guys, how's it going? Just wanted to, talk about what just happened with certain parts of the direct. In this particular video, I wanted to just talk about Kazuya Mishima in in Smash, and I think that's just incredible. Personally, I have seen some people kind of just complain on Twitter about whether or not he's a generic punching guy, and I can tell you, like, if that's the case, those are probably coming from people who don't really play Tekken. Tekken is by far the most popular 3D fighting game, and if you're confused at what a 3D fighting game is versus like other fighting games, no, that doesn't really mean there's 3D models. It typically just means you can step into the background, like it's a fully three-dimensional fighting game that you can move more than just left and right. Think of stuff like Soul Calibur. If you ever played that, Tekken is pretty much like the king when it comes to those kind of fighting games. It's also one of the best-selling fighting games, like, period. Like, it's one of the best-selling fighting games of all time. So it is a very popular franchise. Me myself, I started with Tekken 3, and ever since Tekken 3, I was pretty much, maining Kazuya for like almost every Tekken game, right? And that's still true to this day. Like, if I decide to, boot up Tekken 7, I'm going to play primarily Kazuya. So you can imagine that I was pretty excited seeing Kazuya Mishima make it into Smash Brothers. I'm definitely a better player at Smash than I am Tekken, though. So I guess, like, I'm just kind of excited to see what I can pull off with him in, a whole other fighting game as a whole. I ended up watching the entirety of the E3 Direct with friends, so I wasn't able to really, record like reaction like I would want to. I was just kind of, having a good time with friends and watching them react as well and that kind of thing. But Kazuya was definitely like one of the highlights of the Direct, and I'm sure that's not really surprising to a lot of you. If any of you guys know me well enough, maybe the people who have been subscribed to me for a while. Maybe you guys know me from other people's channels, who is aware of like the kind of games that I am into. I do, fancy myself a pretty decent Smash player, or a pretty good Smash player, depending on who you ask. And while I'm not exactly very good at Tekken, it is a fighting game franchise that I've been playing since, I was like a child, like a small child. And since I pretty much played Kazuya like the entire time, I'm just in love with this inclusion, and I'm very curious as to how they're gonna translate some of what makes Tekken so great into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, because that is, I would say, personally speaking, in my own opinion, I would say that Tekken is like one of the most complicated fighting games you could probably get into, where there's like a bunch of like crazy combos where like combos last there's like a million combos in the game. There's like certain inputs that, like, if you're unfamiliar with what they mean, you'd be lost immediately. People who play Tekken, they're already familiar, they're already used to those kind of things, so for them it's not really like a massive undertaking. But for people who are new to Tekken, or maybe even new to fighting games as a whole, it can be a pretty daunting task to kind of like get into it, look at the move list, and figure out what works, what doesn't, what connects, that kind of thing. With that being said, I never really played Tekken to a competitive level. I was actually one of those people who played Tekken purely on just its story. Like, that was what I was into when it came to Tekken. I played Tekken 3, and from there I was just like, oh man, I want to see what happens next. I'm gonna keep playing, follow this franchise. My brother was also just as into Tekken as I was, so he would, play Eddie. If any of you guys are familiar with Tekken, he played Eddie. And we would just, get through the whole story and just figure out what's going on. And it was just kind of like a really good franchise. It was basically Tekken, Mortal Kombat, and Killer Instinct is what, they were the fighting games that I grew up playing. Eventually Killer Instinct, kind of stopped. But I did end up continuing with Mortal Kombat and Tekken as the years went by. But those were like the ones that I grew up playing and that I have the most, connection to in terms of fighting games. Smash Brothers is always there too. I'm just, naming fighting games that's not, Smash Brothers. So seeing like Kazuya make it in is a big deal for me, because while Ryu and Ken are from Street Fighter, that's a very respected and well-known fighting game. Same thing with Terry Bogard, Fatal Fury is well-known. It's just, I didn't grow up playing either one of those two. Like, I didn't grow up playing Street Fighter, I didn't grow up playing Fatal Fury or King of Fighters, but I did grow up playing Tekken. So out of all of the fighting game, I guess, representatives of Smash Ultimate, this is the one that hits me the closest, because this is the guy that I actually played. It's like 1 point for being from a franchise I grew up playing. It's a whole other point for specifically the character that I mained and played in Tekken. So it just, it's perfect for me. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Kazuya, I have seen some people online basically just saying stuff like, oh, Kazuya just seems like a really generic choice. I guess it's just hard for me to agree with that, considering that I've grew up playing this character, so I have an attachment to this character. I have seen some people say that they believe that his impact is not as strong as, like, say, someone like Banjo. And while I only would agree with that statement if we were talking specifically about Nintendo fans. And honestly, I could kind of understand the perspective if you're speaking about just Nintendo fans, because that's typically the people who would be interested in playing Super Smash Bros. But the problem I have with that is that if you're speaking purely about Nintendo fans, there's a lot of characters that are, technically bigger than games that Nintendo fans are into that would never get represented into Smash Bros. Like Minecraft Steve, for instance. Like, his franchise is drastically bigger than a lot of the things that are in Super Smash Bros. And we got him, right? And I understand, like, maybe you're not someone who grew up with Tekken, you're not someone who played Tekken, but Tekken as a franchise has sold significantly more than Banjo. So there's a lot more people, right, who know Kazuya's face than know Banjo's face. And that is what I believe. You can disagree with that any way you feel like it, but I personally feel like there is a shit ton more people who know Kazuya Mishima more than there is Banjo. But the reason why I believe Banjo had more of an impact in terms of reactions for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is because there are more Nintendo fans specifically who has played Banjo or is at least aware of Banjo's existence because of Banjo's, affiliation with Nintendo back in the day on the Nintendo 64. Meanwhile, Tekken was something that was more so a massive hit outside of Nintendo's realm. Like, sure, we got, every once in a while we got like a bit of Tekken on Nintendo platforms. Like, we got Tekken Tag Tournament 2 on the Wii U. But other than that, I don't really remember what else was really on Nintendo platforms. So, like, Tekken is a massive thing. It is significantly bigger than Banjo, but it's also significantly bigger for people outside of the Nintendo space. So that's why I feel like that could be the case. You can disagree with me however way you feel like it, but I think that's pretty much what it was. Kazuya is a face that has been seen more, Heihachi included. If you're not familiar, Heihachi's like the other like face of Tekken. But other than that, it's basically just, I think Banjo, in terms of reactions, got a bigger reaction because most of the people watching these Nintendo Directs are Nintendo fans like you and I. And most of us have played Banjo, or at the very least, are aware of Banjo and the amount of people who wanted him. So, that's kind of the thing. And I do feel like there are a lot of, let's say, people who feel like characters that get into Smash need to have some kind of, history with Nintendo. But we've seen that, time and time again, that's very little. They can have the smallest little thread, or maybe even like nothing up until later, and they can still make it into Smash. Like, it doesn't seem to be that important as to whether or not they have video games on Nintendo platforms, or how many, or whatever the case may be. A lot of the highly requested characters come from like this kind of like mentality of like, oh, Doom Guy, even though I would love Doom Guy, has Doom 64. He had Doom games on Nintendo platforms. The guy from Tales of Symphonia, I think his name was Lloyd, he had a game on GameCube, right? So I feel like it's not a big deal. It's really not a big deal for it to appeal specifically to Nintendo fans. I think they're just looking for characters that have a massive, you know, massive amount of people who know them, or from big franchises who have like a lot of, like, I guess, attention on them. And Kazuya, I would argue there are millions of people who have seen Kazuya's face and know Kazuya that don't know Banjo. In fact, I personally know people who are like that, who don't play Nintendo platforms and know Kazuya and immediately was able to recognize him, but don't know Banjo until I told them who they are. And that's kind of it. So that's how I feel about it. Kazuya's great. I love him. I can't wait to pull some stuff off with him. And I'm just generally really fucking excited about Kazuya. So let me know how you guys feel in the comments. And until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.
Shifty, yeah, shifty. Wanna be the #1 gamer? Come and get me. It'd be dope if you subscribe. Could you like the vid, please? Take your time, you don't gotta do it swiftly. Shifty, shifty. Wanna be the #1 gamer? Come and get me.